Marking its 40th anniversary in 2022, Blue Door is the largest emergency housing provider in York Region, providing life-saving support to children, youth, adults, seniors, and families at risk or experiencing homelessness. Along with offering emergency housing and housing retention support, in the past 2 years, Blue Door has expanded its service offering to further work toward preventing and ending homelessness through Inclusion, the first supportive housing program for 2 SLGBTQ+ youth in York Region. Construct, a social enterprise by Blue Door, providing supported skills training to help youth and adults break barriers to employment and secure meaningful careers in construction trades. And launching in 2022, a health hub which will include a nurse and in-reach system navigator to help people regain the health and well-being needed to secure and retain permanent housing. Join Blue Door's mission and become part of the solution by learning more at bluedoor.ca.
We at On the Way Home would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And in Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Welcome to On the Way Home, a podcast dedicated to the issues surrounding homelessness and the incredible experts making a difference in the lives of homeless people. Remember to subscribe to the podcast anywhere you're listening and share it with a friend.
Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I am your host, Michael Braithwaite, and as always, and I can say that with great confidence because we have a streak going on here. As always, we have an awesome guest to drop knowledge and wisdom in the sector this week. And we're so fortunate week after week. There's so many people in this country, around the world, doing life-saving, life-changing work that we can learn from. Hey, why you don't have to be an original. You just have to open your eyes, look around, and be willing to listen to others. There's so much great work being done across this country, across the world, that we can borrow from in our pushing forward to and prevent homelessness and reduce poverty. And so we'll get to that guest, but I want to tell you some stuff that is happening at, of course, my organization, Blue Door. Blue Door, as you hear this podcast, will probably be somewhere in June when this podcast drops. And of course, in Ontario, that is Pride Month. And a couple of years back, probably 3-4 years back in York Region, there's now one but two surveys done. One by the wonderful folks at Seneca College that looked at the needs of 2 LGBTQ+ youth, which showed they didn't feel safe in our typical emergency shelter programs and housing programs, and there wasn't enough. So there's lots of great work that came out of that. And there was a second survey done by the very famous Dr. Alex Abramovich, who does great work in this sector, that showed much of the same, that we need specialized programs for 2 LGBTQ+ youth. And I'm pleased to say, about a year and a half ago, Blue Door responded to that. We came up with a program called Inclusion, which is INN, like an in, you stay, inclusion. Pretty catchy, I know. Hey, it's called Inclusion, and it is it's a semi-independent living program for 2 LGBTQ+ youth with wraparound support. So it's pretty cool. It's ever growing. We're learning as we go along. But a really cool program that I'm quite proud of at Blue Door, and we're going to continue to grow that and hopefully scale it across the country because it's good work, and that need is straight across the country, if not North America. And of course, this podcast is also brought to you by our friends and partners, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And they do some great work. If you ever wondered what Built for Zero is, the Built for Zero campaign is, go to their website, check it out. They're always looking for new communities to take on a Built for Zero plan. So check that out. Of course, their conference is coming up in November. It's the biggest of its kind. It is an awesome conference. There's so much learning at that conference, so many great speakers. So I encourage you to sign up. And hey, if you're a company that is looking to reach out to this sector, there's no better place to be a sponsor at than that conference and hit a couple thousand people at the same time. It's both virtual and in person. So if you don't want to travel, it's in Toronto this year. You can attend virtually, but if you want to, you've been cooped up for the last couple of years, come on out to Toronto. It'll be a wonderful conference. But let's get to today's guest. Today's guest, I have been trying to get on the show for a while, and because she is so busy and so humble too, She'll never tell you that. But she is so busy saving and changing lives with her organization, always willing to share. And I've heard from others in our community, I mean, our sector really, that say, hey, if you want to learn something, go see this person, and she'll share. And she does, because she's always doing innovative, cool, changing work, and they're always pivoting, to make sure that her organization is meeting the needs of our most vulnerable. So let me introduce you to today's guest. We have Deirdre Freiheit, who is the president and CEO of Shepherds of Good Hope, and Shepherds of Good Hope Foundation. So SGH, as we'll call it right now for short, is a dynamic, innovative organization that cares for the needs of adults experiencing homelessness and who live with mental health challenges. Hey, listen, language matters. That's what we say. People experiencing homelessness, or adults, because we want you to see the adult first, right? Substance use disorders and trauma. Shepherds of Good Hope operates a large homeless shelter, soup kitchen, and 5 supportive housing residents. Lots going on. She's been a leader in the nonprofit sector for almost 30 years, despite only being 35 years old, and having previously been executive director of the Health Charities Coalition of Canada and CEO of the Canadian Lung Association. She's a former member of the Institute Advisory Board for Nutrition, Metabolism, Diabetes of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. That is a mouthful. A lay reviewer on the Heart and Stroke Foundation Research Grant review panels, and is a passionate advocate for marginalized populations. If you haven't gained that already, she absolutely is. She's a graduate of Atlantic Business College in New Brunswick. Deirdre, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
It's great to have you here. I mean, so we ask the same question, first question each time, and while there's themes and similarities, it's always a little different because it's different for everyone who answers it. Deirdre, what does home mean to you?
Well, as many people have probably said, it means family, but it also means many things. It means safety, security, a refuge, a place to go at the end of the day, whether it's a good day or a bad day, just be able to come to a home, your own home, and have that security is nice. And I think for me, the big word that comes to mind when I think about home is gratitude, because not everybody has the luxury of having a home. And I see that every day. And when I come home at night, I really do appreciate the fact that I have a home. And so my team and I are there to try to help people who don't have a home obtain one.
Absolutely, and you're doing a great job with that. What a great word, gratitude. I think that so often we take for granted when you look at that symbol of home, which is a key on your key ring, right? And not everyone has that key that unlocks that door to your individual home. In fact, there's over 250,000 Canadians on any given night, right, that don't. But your organization is doing great work to rapidly reduce that. Now, while your organization is often in the media due to its amazing work, most recently you made national news when a certain convoy landed in Ottawa. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened, and more importantly, the awesome response from the community? It's just a great story.
Yeah, it's certainly not something we expected by any stretch. Wasn't media that we had anticipated at all. But in January, when the Freedom Convoy came to Ottawa, we were sort of one of the first organizations that experienced some of the sort of the side effects, I guess, of the number of people who came to Ottawa to protest. And we had a couple of incidents. One was, some people came down to the soup kitchen and demanded to be served meals. They had some altercations with our volunteers and our staff, and we had to escort them out of the building. And there was a statement made on social media that Shepherds was, happy to support the Patriots. And so we just felt we needed to respond to that. And our response was, we're here to serve people who are experiencing homelessness. We're here to serve people who are in the community who are precariously housed and may have to make a choice to pay the rent or have food. And so that is who we're here to serve. And so we just wanted to get that statement out there to differentiate what was happening. We also had a person in the shelter who was in his 70s and living with schizophrenia and was beaten by a couple of people who were just associated with the convoy. And we had a security guard and a peer support worker who saw this happening and went to help, and then they experienced racial slurs and they were able to get the person back to safety. But it was a series of events like that. And so I think the community responded. They were angry, and they responded by donating, and the response was just absolutely incredible, and to the point where we're going to be able to put a lot of those resources towards building housing. And so that's, out of something challenging, always something good comes out of it. And the community response was amazing. And frankly, it wasn't even just people in Ottawa. It was around the country and even across the world. They'd actually shut down our donation system at one point. We had 14,000 individual donations in a very short period of time. So, good always comes from difficult circumstances.
Yeah, what an amazing story. And I remember hearing that the system actually couldn't handle it, and what a great problem to have. And it just, that shows that, one of the reasons we do this show is if we create awareness, if Canadians know, if they're more aware of the challenges, they are very generous and kind-hearted. And that's a great example of that. Like, hey, we didn't know. And if you really want to make a change, if you see something like that, give. And man, do they ever. So that's very cool. Now, yeah. And your organization, I touched a little bit on what Shepherds of Good Hope does, but I'm hoping you could expand on that a little bit for our listenership.
Sure. So we operate the largest shelter in Ottawa for adults of all genders, and people with very complex issues. They may be struggling with developmental delays, concurrent disorders, substance use, mental health concerns. So we operate the largest shelter, but really that's not where it ends for us. That's only the beginning. So we feel that Shepherds really provides a continuum of care for people who are experiencing homelessness. We want that. We talk a lot at Shepherds about homelessness being an experience and not an identity. And so our role is to really get people out of that first chaotic experience of being homeless or becoming chronically homeless by providing housing as well. So we're a very large supportive housing provider. We have 5 locations across the city. We're currently building our 6th, which should be done at the end of December. And we will also building another new one downtown, and we have plans for several more. So really, within the next 12 to 18 months, we're hoping that we'll be housing more people than we actually have in the shelter for the first time in the organization's history, which is that's our goal. That's our strategic plan, is get people into housing, because we know that's what ends chronic homelessness.
Yeah, and you know what, you're doing what everyone across the country should be doing. It's not that there will never be a need for emergency. That's a different type of support through trauma. Right. But we need to grow that supportive housing. You're doing exactly that. And very exciting with lots of builds going on, and a great example for the rest of us. Now, so despite our best efforts in this sector, our shelters continue to be full across the nation. I'm pretty sure you'd agree that building more shelters, like we talked about, we shouldn't be doing that. Why do you think this trend is continuing? And how can we think differently moving forward?
Yeah, it's such a complex question, because you're absolutely right. Shelters are not the answer. We know that. I think a lot of things have happened, especially over the last few years. When I think about what our staff has been through in the last 5 years alone, there's an ongoing opiate crisis, a toxic drug supply on the streets. It's wreaking havoc with people and their families. We have a housing crisis. There's not enough affordable housing for people to go to, even if they want to get out of the shelters. And then, a lot of our cities are hubs for people to come from other communities to get health services or other kinds of supports, and then they end up staying and then often losing their housing. So shelters are full, and then you add the pandemic to that, and people have lost their jobs, they've lost their homes, they've lost hope in many ways, and many people unable to cope with that often will turn to substance use to mask that trauma that they're experiencing. And it's a vicious cycle. They become homeless, and then we need to try to wrap the supports around them to help them get back to housing. So I think why is it happening? Just so many factors, and building shelters, not the answer. You're right that there will always be a need for emergency situations, but the real answer, I think, is housing. And if we can't convince governments to come together and communities to come together as well, we need to talk about NIMBYism. We need to talk about stigma, all of those factors, so that people can be successfully housed in the community of their choice. Not where we decide people should live, but where they decide they'd like to live themselves as well. So many factors. I think there's, we can have this discussion for the whole time today, and we'll never solve it, or at least. But I think solving it together is housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there, like, choice, a variety of housing, because there's not one type for everything. Youth have different needs than seniors. People with physical and mental disabilities or challenges might have different needs as well. So all sorts of different needs, absolutely. Yeah. And we've seen examples of that, right? We look at Finland. They had over 600 for the country emergency shelter spots. Now they have, like, 52. And it's not like they shut all those down. They just, over the period of 20 years, built all sorts of different forms of affordable supportive housing, exactly almost what you're doing in Ottawa as well. Now let's talk about innovation. We just talked about the challenges to it. We can throw our hands up and complain, or we can think differently and be innovative. You've done exactly that. Can you talk about some of the innovative approaches you've taken pushing forward?
Sure. I think innovation starts right at the point of somebody experiencing homelessness. So, I've heard people say before, let's not make shelters too comfortable for people to go into, and let's not, give too many services, because people will get comfortable and stay there. I don't know about you, Michael, but I've never actually heard anybody say that their desire is to stay in a shelter forever. We need to wrap supports around people from the time that they become by the time they get to that point where they experience homelessness, to the point that we're able to help them move along in their journey. So for us, it's providing healthcare in the shelter. We have a partnership with Ottawa Inner City Health and Care for Community Health Services, supported by the City of Ottawa and others, where we're able to provide that care in the shelter, so essentially running a mini hospital. And bringing people in for care through diversion. And we can talk about that now, or we can talk about that after if you'd like, but that's one of the innovations in shelter services that we provide. And then in housing, for us, it's targeting or designing the housing programs for people in the different needs that they have. So, for example, in the west end of Ottawa, we have a very large housing residence, 100 units for people who are 55 plus, and they're aging and would otherwise be on the streets without that support. They have severe mental health issues. They have severe aging, mobility issues, those kinds of things. So that residence is provides full support, 24/7 care for those residents around the clock. And then we have others for other needs. So some are more independent. They can have their own units. They don't need to have their food made for them. They can live quite independently, but they still need some supports with staff in the building to help out, life skills development, those kinds of things. And then we have very low barrier housing. So we also provide housing for folks who may not be successful in abstinence-based programs and need harm reduction services, managed alcohol, managed opiate. We also run very, very, unfortunately, very busy supervised consumption and treatment service in the shelter as well, and for people who need those harm reduction services. And our newest build that we're about to embark on in the next little while is going to be 48 units downtown for Indigenous people and women, prioritized, but all of our buildings also serve all genders, and we just try to work with people wherever they are in their journey and help them move to that next stage. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening in diversion, so helping people move from the shelter. Hopefully they never have to come in the first place. If somebody books in and we're able to divert them somewhere else, so they get a better, they don't have to be in a shelter in the first place. We try to do that within the first 24, 48 hours when people are coming in the shelter. Do they have other choices? Can we help them access those other choices so that they don't get entrenched in the shelter system and in street life. And then in housing, it's providing all of those other supports. So it's really, when I see people moving from the shelter into supportive housing, they're often in the shelter in a very chaotic place in their lives. And when we're able to provide those services on site and help stabilize their health and help work with them so that when they move to housing, they don't want to come back to the shelter. So it's providing that continuum of care and really looking at the different needs of different groups of people.
You mentioned something, well, you mentioned a lot of key things there. One of the things I'd like to kind of hone in on is you're talking about not wanting to return to the shelter. So sometimes, because people spend a lot of times, whether it's one night in an emergency shelter, that is their housing, that's their home.
Yeah.
And so they might forge a sense of family. They've got other people there that they get to know. They've got staff that care about them. We put them into housing. All of a sudden they're alone. They don't have that sense of community or family. So have you worked, I'm sure your team would, have you worked at creating that sense of community once people are in housing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of the beauty of supportive housing, really at its core, because for us, the folks that have that often will be at Shepherd's are not necessarily successful when they're just plunked in a housing unit somewhere without family connections or friends, without those social supports, without the healthcare supports. They will inevitably be back in the shelter within days or months. It often is not the choice for them, but supportive housing and wrapping that 24/7 care around a person and helping build that community. So supportive housing is more than healthcare. We bring in a lot of volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers at Shepherd's, and they make all the meals, whether it's in the soup kitchen or in supportive housing. So, 3 or 4 meals a day. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, our volunteers come in. And what the beauty of that is that they connect as well with the residents in the building. They might come in and serve a meal, they'll play cards, they might help them learn how to cook. There are book clubs. We had a yoga club at one point. So we try to have resident meetings and say, what is it that you need? And what can we do to help make this feel like a home for you? So in supportive housing, it's that community, because the people that live there also have the supportive staff, the supportive volunteers, other kinds of services coming in. Sometimes it's bringing in therapy dogs, to make that connection with people. So there's lots of different ways that we can do that. And for the people that are there, they don't want to be alone in an apartment somewhere without that kind of support. And I think that's why supportive housing in this case, or in our case at least, is quite successful. And I would say we have over a 90%, if not 95% success rate where people don't go back to the shelters, because once they have that safe place to be and they have a lock on their door and they have a shower that they can go in, a hot shower that they can stay in for half an hour if they want. They're not, at risk of belongings being stolen in a shelter, or they're not at risk of 6 people being sardined into a room. They have their own room, and that's safety. I think that's the start of all of that. And they may choose at some point that they want to live more independently somewhere else, and they can do that too.
Yeah, well said. Now, you talked about health and its relation to, and I'll tell you, it's interesting how the degrees of connection. So one of our first guests was Dr. Jeffrey Turnbull, of course, and one of our most popular guests. Just an amazing, amazing man.
One of my favorite people.
Yeah, just, well, how can, who, when we called him Dr. Turnbull, he said, please just call me Jeff. Good guy. And then another guest we had on this show talked about shelter care from Waterloo, our friend John. And he said, hey, listen, this was not my idea. I went and saw Deirdre. She took the time. She took me around. And I thought the least I could do is do something more. And so I think people understand. We've had a lot of pretty cool healthcare professionals on this podcast talking about the link. We had Dr. Sandy Bachman a while back, who was head of the Canadian Medical Association. And he said, listen, Michael, if you tell me your postal code, I'll tell you your state of health. Because that just showed access, right, to healthcare. You definitely get this. Let's talk about healthcare and how did that come about? You do a lot of that within your programs, right?
Yeah, so the folklore to this is when Shepherd's was first starting up, a lot of the folks that were served were, the issues of the day were drinking, was alcoholism. It's progressed so much more than that, unfortunately, these days. But there was a person who was a chronic alcoholic who was staying at the shelter, and he would go out every morning before 5 o'clock because he was detoxing at night, and he needed to go out and drink, and to stave off, the detoxing. And so the staff at the time were trying to get him to stay, for actually to have Dr. Turnbull come in and provide care for him, and he couldn't stay long enough to get that health care. So one of them said, why don't you stay here and have a glass of wine with me? And this is early in the morning, but that's essentially the folklore around how it all started. He was able to stay and then get the health care that they needed. And then, of course, I think it was Seton House in Toronto that was providing managed alcohol services at the time, and the team went and had a look at what they were doing. And then we brought that back to Shepherd's and really started our own managed alcohol program in the shelter, so that we were able to help stabilize people. And then we've now moved that into supportive housing. So we've got 2 supportive housing residences that have managed alcohol programs in them. And I think that's part of how all of that gets started, because not everybody is going to be successful in abstinence-based programs. And then, of course, that's morphed over the years to, be providing services, all kinds of different services people need. We run the largest clean needle exchange in Ottawa outside of regular business hours. For people who just need to come and get that to be safer. Managed alcohol, safe supply, managed opiates, clean needles, supervised injection services. They're all part of that continuum of health. So if it starts in the shelter and then we can move people to housing, that's what we're doing. And the diversion piece of that program is also that police and paramedics and OC Transpo can come and drop people off to us for care, as opposed to taking them to emergency wards, jail cells. So you're really saving those downstream, you're giving people the dignity of working with people who already have a rapport with them. People don't need to spend 8 hours in emerge detoxing when we can help them in the shelter do that. It gets police out on the streets and paramedics back on the streets more quickly, and to be in the community where they need to be. And there are cost savings to that. So when John came down, we just talked about that. We toured the shelter and supportive housing, and he said, this is something that I think we want to do in Kitchener-Waterloo. We're seeing a need for that, and they've brought shelter care to a whole other level now, and are doing some really cool things in Kitchener-Waterloo. So it's just nice to be a small part of those conversations.
I'd say a larger than a small part. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, did you not, besides saving lives with this health diversion program, $1.2 million, I think, over the course of a year or something is what you saved the system?
Yeah, we've conservatively estimated it at around $2 million a year, but that's those numbers are all a little bit old, and we now have a data team at Shepherd's that we're trying to then bring all this information together, because you and I both know when you go to government, if you can't make the economic argument as to why you should be doing something, then it's a lot harder to get these programs funded, and they're really needed, and they do have that other effect on the rest of the system. So we need to be looking at where can we make those shifts so that we have better outcomes.
Yeah, it's such an incredible program, one that we are looking to copy as well. I'll tell you something about being a harm reduction, like a consumption site, alcohol. So we are not. But Blue Door, what happened is, started the pandemic, about a month in, we opened up the isolation site. And funny enough, I end up, and I am not a frontline, like I don't have the talent to actually work on the front line. I don't have that knowledge, right? And they're amazing. But we opened it real quick, so I had to work the first shift, which was, people will tell you, was a pretty funny story about how badly I did. But we also had to learn on the fly about managing the alcohol system, right? So I remember being in line in the pandemic at the LCBO for clients. I'm going to buy, I'm like, what do they like? What do they want? How much should I buy? Like, so we were learning on the fly. In Seton House, same thing. They were so wonderful. I called. I said, we have no idea what we're doing here. Can you tell me about? And I learned so much, because I think there's a big assumption when you hear about, you know, fentanyl and others, which of course kills me. Like, it's awful. It's awful. But they said the worst drug to come off of is alcohol, and I had no idea. They said alcohol, others you will really hurt, but alcohol withdrawal, immediate withdrawal, will kill you. And they were talking about some individuals have up to 16 tall boys a day, and the worst time they talked about was 6 a.m. in the morning, because of course you've gone the longest time without it. Your body's in withdrawal. I learned so much, and they were so wonderful, and it helped us, you know, with that. But it's such a learning curve. It was so needed for people that don't understand that and the value of it. And so I think it's so wonderful what you're doing with that diversion program and with the healthcare programs too. So let's switch it up one last time here. Something you shared with me beforehand is that you have a passion around addressing stigma. Can you share with our listeners why you feel so strongly about this and what you and the team are doing to make that change happen?
I think that that's one of the biggest things that we need to be addressing. I'm sure that you've heard this. I've heard it a million times. I've had people say it to me. Just tell those bums and lazy people to get a job, and they'll solve all their problems. And I don't think people have, not everybody, but I think that there are some folks out there who feel that the answer to not being homeless is getting a job. Well, if it was that easy, people would be doing it. And I think that we need to talk about language, and we need to talk about stigmatizing people, because I think of the story of a young woman who I met a number of years ago. And this is why stigma. It actually really started me thinking more and more about stigma. She was a young girl who was sexually abused by one of her parents, starting at 4 years old, and she experienced that throughout her most formative years. She had a sister that she was staying home to protect, and at 14 years of age, she couldn't take it anymore, and she left home. So what do you do when you're 14 and you have no education, no job, no money coming in, no ability to support yourself, no family, no supports around you? She somehow made her way from the Ottawa area out west to Calgary, I think it was. And of course, what would happen? Somebody swooped in, took advantage of a young girl trying to get away from an abusive situation, set her up in a dance hall, and got her addicted to crack cocaine. She had a daughter that was taken away from her. She lost, she lost everything. She had no supports. She finally made her way back to Ottawa a number of years later, and she came to the shelter. We were able to put her in supportive housing and help just work with her on the trauma that she'd experienced, getting the counseling that she needed to deal with that, just getting services to help her deal with her addictions. And for a long time, she did super well. And she had a relapse, and we lost touch with her for a couple of years, and she finally came back. And she, the long and the short of it is, we continued to work with her. We continued to support her through housing. She then became a peer support worker. She was meaningfully employed doing work that she had expert knowledge about, and has made a big contribution to the community. She's no longer, again, that's the whole issue of it's an experience, not an identity. And she's now gone on to another job. So she was an employee of ours for a while, and then she was able to then go to another organization and make a contribution there. So, people's lives change through this. That's why it's important to, she would have been somebody who was standing on the street corner who somebody would have said, pull up your bootstraps and get a job. Well, if you have to deal with all of that trauma, you're not going to go out and get a job. That's not the first thing that's on your mind. And so that's why we need to talk about stigma and language. And, it's the experience, not the identity. It's the lazy bums, get a job, that kind of stuff. We really need to humanize this. We did a very short series at Shepherds a few years ago called Humans of Shepherds, and people told their stories on camera. very short, very sweet. The reaction to that was incredible. People sent notes to them. You're doing great. We're so glad you're part of this community. Thank you for telling your story. Sending you love. Like the response was incredible. That same group of people out in the corner in a huddle on the street are the same group that people are saying, pull up your bootstraps, get a job, you're lazy. Exact same people. But when they tell their story and you humanize it and you use the proper language and you just make the whole thing human for people, it's really hard not to want to help. So I think that's
well said. Yeah, well, of course. I mean, the reason why do you switch the language around? You said that when you look at that person, see the brother, the sister, the father, the grandfather, the mother, right, the aunt. They are a person first who happens to be going through an experience at this time.
That's right.
And people see that. And I think, generally, I don't think television and media helps, right? Because when they show the pictures of people experiencing homelessness, it generally is. So, Deirdre, I have to say, when I'll go and chat with anyone who will listen about homelessness, and sometimes mostly with grade 3, 4, where they don't have any filters, they'll say, what does homelessness look like? And they'll be super direct and inappropriate. And they'll actually describe me usually. And if you're not watching a video, it's like an older white guy with a big beard on the corner asking, like, so they'll describe that. And I'll say, okay, while that's what they may have seen on the streets of, say, Ottawa or Toronto, right? There is no look. We say it's a feeling. It's a feeling of loneliness, despair, hopelessness, fear, and that kind of thing. And if you look around, anyone here, you don't know, especially with youth, because of the stigma, even a youth who may not have a safe place to live will not define themselves as being homeless or experiencing homelessness, because they're like, right. Oh no, I'm not that guy, I'm not that person. Do you have a safe place to stay? Well, no. Okay, well, it's just changing language around it too, because they don't want to. It's embarrassing. They just want to be like every other kid in their class. You talk about laziness. Talking about the kid who's sleeping through class, where people are like, oh, what a lazy kid, where you don't know they were walking around all last night because now they finally feel safe, so they're sleeping, right? So yes, stigma plays a big part, and I think I do believe, we said this before, and we saw this through what happened with the convoy and the giving to your organization, is people are good. There's a lot of good there. We just may not understand that bootstrapping it or just getting a job. The trauma you described too. We've had trauma counselors on this to talk about that, and he said at one point it might be someone is going along, they've got stable housing, everything's great. Someone like myself enters the room, and someone that hurt them really bad had a beard, and that traumatizes them, and it sets it off, it triggers it. You don't know until we deal with that. You also mentioned something that I'd like to address too, around there is that ground where people say don't make shelters or housing too nice, because you don't want to get them too comfortable or offer services where they won't get to. We're working on housing plans, but remember this, everyone. One of the biggest things we have to offer are not 4 walls and a roof, but is compassion and comfort. I mean, someone's coming out of a traumatic situation. Their first choice is not to land in the services that we provide. They're coming out of trauma. They've lost their home. The least we could do is provide them with a very comfortable space, even for a short time, before we get working hard on that housing plan and get them a key to their front door. I get it, that that piece about they may never want to leave, but at the same time, everyone deserves that comfortable, dignified space, right?
Yeah, and I mean, shelters are they're not comfortable and lovely places that people want to throw down and stay forever. If you think about, most of us that are operating shelters, we're operating rooms that they're very small rooms, and you might have 4 or 6 people in a room. That whole issue of storage. People are walking with their life's belongings in a backpack or a couple of bags, and we can't even always store their most precious things for them. So, the idea that anybody wants to stay in that lifestyle, I think, and stay in a cramped shelter with no place to put their belongings, or, with concerns that they could get stolen, or just without that feeling of being in a safe place on their own with a lock on their door, and just the most basic things. We had somebody that moved into supportive housing one time, and the first thing that we said, well, what do you like about your new home? And he said, the shower. I can take a shower. Nobody's going to interrupt me. I can put my clothes down. Nobody's going to take them. There's nobody that wants to stay in a shelter for the rest of their lives. And so I think, it would be hard pressed to make them so comfortable that anybody would really want to stay for a long time. People want to have a home of their own with the dignity of a place to stay where they feel safe and be part of a community.
Absolutely. Well said. Now, I know you've made some changes because you had 14,000 individual guests come in. If people want to, listen, you're always accepting donations because the need is greater than ever. Where can people go to find out more about the great work you're doing, get involved, or to donate?
They can go to our website, which is sghottawa.com. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find us there. And so we've got lots of access spots, to lots of places to access. And all of our services are identified on our website. We also have a phone number anybody can call if they want more information. We're happy to chat as well with folks that might want to have other information. And there's also a donate spot on our website as well if people would like to donate. And when you're donating, you're helping somebody find a home.
Yeah, listen, you're being part of the solution, right? Government certainly should always play a part in this, but so should our communities. And we know that. So get involved, give your time, give your talent, give your donation, be a part of that solution for sure. Help the good work of the Shepherds of Good Hope. They are doing life-changing work. Deirdre, thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show today. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Great to talk to you. Appreciate your time as well.
Awesome. It's funny. Of course, we do this podcast. We want to build awareness. We want to build, give people a chance to learn something each time we're on, to share knowledge across the nation. And certainly, there's a lot to be learned today. I love this diversion from a health sense. We've heard about diversion into shelters, but also from this healthcare piece. And it is brilliant. And I think we all should be doing that across the country. I know at Blue Door, we're in the midst of doing that and working with John Neufeld as well with shelter care, looking at that. So incredible knowledge drop today by Deirdre. Great work being done, innovative and different work pressing forward. It's so cool. And you know what? Selfishly, through this podcast, I get inspired. I'm inspired today. Very inspiring guests doing inspiring work. Her and her team are incredible. Check it out. Go to the website and donate. Listen, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, share it with friends. Write a comment. And hey, if you know of someone who should come on this podcast, a guest, reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. I would love to hear from you, or if you have any feedback. Until then, we'll see you next time on The Way Home.